I'm JoJo Platt. I work with Neurotech Reports, among other things. I really thank you guys for being here, along with some really great panelists on our neurorehabilitation devices panel. To that end, we have Jennifer French, another one of our Neurotech contributors online, and then Domenico Pastora, who's the head of product design at Psionic. Psionic is providing solutions to help people with mobility issues, and they're starting with their wearable lower leg neural sleeve. I'll let you get into that. And Richard Faust is the CEO of Microtransponder. Microtransponder is commercializing paired VNS to treat neurological conditions. And to our earlier discussion of the one indication versus many, they've put their initial focus on to upper limb deficits in chronic stroke patients. And just to expound a little bit on Jennifer and her accomplishments, she's the executive director of Neurotech Networks, where she focuses on education and advocacy of neurotechnology solutions in a variety of situations. She's also a consultant in the field with significant impact across a number of areas and companies. And like I mentioned, she's a senior editor with Neurotech Reports. She's a published author and an accomplished athlete and sailor. So I encourage you to read her book so you can learn more about that. And with that, Jen, I'm going to turn it over to you first to talk a little bit more about what you're doing in this area and where we go from here.
Wow, thanks for the great plug there, JoJo. Great to see you, and thanks for having me. And again, my apologies for not being there in person, but this is just a fantastic conference. So just wanted to kick off to give a little bit of context, because we're going to be talking about rehabilitation or neuro rehab, if you will. JoJo already did a great introduction to what Neurotech Network is. We're a nonprofit that focuses on education and advocacy for access to neurotechnology devices, therapies, and treatments. These are our capacities. We have our Neurotech directory, which for people that are living with conditions can look for their condition and find different types of neurotech devices online. We also tell personal stories of people that are either in clinical trials or who are active users of neuromodulation. We do a lot of education and awareness, as well as community engagement, which is a kind of a hot topic in terms of the development of therapies these days. So we also help to promote the growth and development of neurotechnology. So just a really quick, I'm going to take a quick step away from rehab real quick, but I wanted to, because we are an advocacy organization, take an advocacy moment. Matt Engel from Paradromics sent this out last night about a public notice that the Department of Commerce is considering doing export controls on BCI emerging technologies. So there's the link to the Federal Register, as well as the PDF. And the way that this notice is defining BCI is that they call it neural control interfaces, mind-machine interfaces, direct neural interfaces, and brain-machine interfaces. So if you're anywhere within that definition, please go to that link and have your voice said to the public comment for the Department of Commerce. And the deadline, excuse me, is December 10th. Okay, so back to rehab. So when we think about rehab, it's actually it's quite a big market, but very diverse, if you will. So these are 2020 numbers, so they're a little dated, but a global rehabilitation market overall is about a $20 to $30 billion market. When we look at neuro rehab, specifically neuro rehab equipment, which includes neuromodulation, but also includes some other devices as well, is about a $50 million market. And the other thing to keep in mind when we think about reimbursement for rehab is that there's lots of payment codes, as we just had in the previous session, but typically for rehab, the therapists end up billing on a 15-minute increment. So something to keep in mind. So in the neurotech space, there's a lot of emerging technologies. There's a lot of excitement around rehabilitation from a lot of different modalities. But one of the key things is clinical adoption is so key. And I think that was expressed earlier in the previous session about the importance of clinical adoption. But I want to give you kind of two cases here of examples of how clinical professionals within the rehab space evaluate new and emerging technologies. So this is the FAME framework. This was actually published by Kristen Musselman out of University of Toronto, or the UNH system. And really it looks at helping clinicians use evidence-based practices to help kind of frame the 5 elements that they need to consider of whether to adopt a technology into their therapeutic environment. So this is a great published paper, but again, you will notice that feasibility and meaningfulness and appropriateness and effectiveness, right? That's what our FDA always thinks of, but also, which was mentioned earlier in the previous session, was economic evidence. So that's something else that needs to be considered, particularly when you're dealing with rehabilitation facilities. Another model is another way of thinking of it from a case of cost analysis. So this was a study that was done particularly for robotic therapy and in the examples of exoskeleton. So really taking it through the lens of a rehabilitation hospital, of looking at body weight support systems, using robotics, using over-the-ground therapy, either low cost or high cost, and exoskeletons. And this gets into the minds of those that are operating these rehabilitation hospitals, of how they evaluate the adoption of therapy. And one of the kind of key takeaways from this paper was that, unfortunately, the reality of technology is the delay between the rising clinical evidence and the rate at which reimbursement changes to account for the cost of technology. So something to keep in mind as well. But this is kind of a good framework when you're looking at all the other competing modalities that you might be, that a clinic might be using for a specific indication. So a couple things to think about, kind of takeaways of big pictures and trends that we've been seeing in terms of neurorehabilitation, is that it's key to have influential clinical partners. Chris had expressed that in the previous session, but also understanding mechanisms, including dosing. So dosing is always a big question when it comes to clinical applications, as well as training and billing, because that's one of the big barriers of adoption of technology, is having the time to train the therapists on how to actually use that technology. And keep in mind, which was the cost analysis, is the business model that includes clinicians of how they're going to take a piece of that reimbursement pie. Also think about coupling compensatory therapies with neuromodulation. So a lot of therapists are always thinking about the compensatory therapies that already exist and how they're already billing for that, maybe how neuromodulation might be able to supplement that. And one other outcome from COVID, obviously, was the rise of telerehabilitation. So we might see those shifts in terms of how we do rehabilitation here in the future. So great, looking forward to a lively discussion, and I'm going to hand it back over to Jojo.
Yes, good morning. My name is Domenico Bisaturo. I'm Chief Product Officer of Psionic. We are a very young company. We just turned 4 years old. And we started like this company because my CEO, like our CEO, unfortunately, his daughter was diagnosed with cerebral palsy when she was, I think, like 8 months old, pretty late. And it was very frustrated because the only solution at the time, or up until now, has been just like crutches and walkers. And having always walked into the technology field, it felt like it was like totally anachronistic that like we have like self-driving car, but like we cannot self-drive our legs or have our leg move like properly in the moment in which there's either like a neurological accident or any other kind of ortho issue. And so he decided like to start this company with the goal of helping like people with neurological problem, mobility problem in general, be able to be independent and move. So I think like I just have a video of one of our study participants, so that then I think it expresses better what we do compared to me talking.
My name is Jan Grierson. I have a lifelong condition of cerebral palsy. We're in a little town called Half Moon Bay. I love coming here. I love everything about it, the way it smells, the way it feels. And this particular place has been off limits for me for at least 15 years. I've had multiple surgeries. I've had many, many treatments and worn 5 or 6, 7 maybe different sets of devices. And the neural sleeve is the one that I look forward to putting on every day. I get to walk along with my loved ones linking arms, which makes me tear up all the time, because when you walk with a walker, you're on your own. And they want to help, but they can't be close. So we get to walk together, and it's magic, absolutely magic.
And we started like pre-sales, and we're going to be delivering the first product in a couple of weeks. But we have like at the moment, in those few months that we worked, around 1 million sales, and about like 7,000 participants in our waiting list for getting the device. We can go to the next one. We can go, right. So yeah, so like that's a bit like our result up now. We see like improvements in 94 of the patients that are already using the sleeve. Those patients are like under IRB. The sleeve will be the first commercial one, will be delivered in a couple of weeks. So the results are great. It's not covered by CMS, and probably we will talk about that after. So this is like an out-of-pocket expense. It's a subscription device. Right now, the subscription is like $200 a month. And if you can go to the next one, just like to explain, is basically like there's a lot of technology crammed into this product. We have lab quality gait analysis embedded. We have like 24 electrodes that are placed on the main muscle group, and that can change like the way electricity is shaped, so that we can precisely control movement. And on all the device, there's like embedded algorithms in order to take all those data that arrive and then like modify stimulation so that we can support gait. The next slide is just like our results. As I was saying, like we have like over 90% improvement in all the people that have been testing the sleeve. Up until now, I think like our oldest client has been like more than 6 months on our trial. And yeah, looking forward to the discussion. I'll keep it short so that we can discuss.
So Richard Faust, CEO of Microtransponder, implantable vagus nerve stimulation for chronic stroke impairment for the upper limb, very specific. The journey of the company, if you go to the next slide, started with a core group of engineers that spent about 10 years developing both a preclinical model as well as studying that preclinical model and a lot of different applications. Ultimately, we ended up with stroke being the area, and that was published in a critical paper in Nature, which is really the kind of the foundation for the science. What is actually happening in the concept of neuroplasticity in terms of being able to improve function by retraining the brain around the affected area. We then validated that with multiple pilot studies. It was capped off by a pivotal double-blinded study that was sham controlled and published in Lancet, which led to a breakthrough device designation and FDA approval. So with that as the background, a lot of how we got from point A to point B was really thinking through that commercial strategy. How are we going to fit within codes like a CPT code, as well as be able to bring this new technology, this new concept to a group of patients that today don't have options? I think part of what we're talking about today is bringing a spotlight to what happens to patients after they have an acute stroke. What I would say is that there's lots of medical device technologies that are being invested in order to improve and save people on the acute stroke side. The last 10 years, we've gone from 350 physicians treating acute stroke to over 4,000. You've gone from 150 hospitals as comprehensive stroke centers to over 2,000. So there's a lot of people that are living after they get a stroke, but they still have some impact from that stroke, whether it's upper limb, lower limb, cognition, et cetera, et cetera. And so that group of patients that we define as chronic, which is mushy at best in the literature, between 3 and 6 months, we define it as 6 months post-stroke, because there's a lot of things that can happen to that patient in the 0 to 6 month timeframe, spontaneous recovery. And we want to make sure that patient has exhausted every option before they would get an implant, right? So that's the technology. Next slide. So this is the journey that I'm talking about. And I think what's so important is, today when you ask hospitals, what do they do with patients after they're discharged? They go through inpatient rehabilitation, perhaps some outpatient. They lose track. And ultimately, if you think about the problem that hospitals are solving today, what they're solving for is new patients. And when you tell them, okay, you have 800 discharges in stroke, and they came to your hospital because their stroke happened near your hospital, they may not have been your patients before. And by the way, they have a lot of comorbidities, but you discharge them and you don't keep in touch with them. Right. So there's actually an opportunity from the hospital side as we talk about bringing these patients back to comprehensive stroke centers to be treated. The other side of the story, when we look at our endpoints from our clinical study, obviously we had to set it up in order to fulfill, what the academics thought were the way that you measure improvement, Fugl-Meyer, Wolf motor function. Our tertiary endpoints were also around ADLs. Because really, at the end of the day, what you're talking about is people who have lost the ability to be independent. They need help at this point. So when we hear what people really want, on one side, you have people talking about, percentage or the number of Fugl-Meyer points that they've improved. The patient's just like, I want to be able to brush my teeth. I want to be able to comb my hair. I want to be able to go to the bathroom by myself. And so as we think about commercialization, all of this becomes important because you have multiple stakeholders that you're trying to influence. Scientists and physicians need to feel comfortable that this is safe, and patients have an idea of what good looks like. Next slide. So this is kind of the picture that everyone has seen before, which is this: how long does it take before you kind of get to plateau? Now, plateau is a bad word in rehab, because if you get to plateau, it means that rehab is not needed anymore. Actually, that's not true, because the other side of this curve that no one wants to talk about is that after 6 months, people can get tune-ups every year because they get their insurance benefits every year. But there's a cycle. When people are not going through rehab, they decline, they get spasticity, they get fractures. So, the journey of someone who's going through this is a tough one. What I like to say is what VivaStem does is it changes the ceiling. This is a 2 to 3 times benefit over rigorous rehab. It changes your ceiling. So now when you pair it with rehab, the outcomes are amazing. Next slide. This is the picture, of the technology, which I'll just say it's Gen 1, but it works really well. So it is an IPG, a vagus nerve lead. We've got a computer with software and also a magnet. And so although the procedure happens in a hospital and you go through 6 weeks of rehab, that's not the destination. That was the destination in the clinical study. But now that we're in the real world setting, the destination is forever. Patients will continue to improve. They will swipe their IPG at home, do exercises. They may come back every year to get tuned up by, outpatient rehab clinic. And we have data that is in the process of being published that shows that people continue to improve over time. So what is great about what we get to do is we get to have the conversations with patients about how can they change their life? And today is not, it's not about like what happens over the next 6 weeks, is how much work are you going to put in and dedicate to the problem that you have? Last slide. I'm just going to touch on neuroplasticity. It sounds like there's some neuroscientists in the audience, so I'm going to be very careful because I'm not a neuroscientist. What is amazing to me, what attracted me to microtransponder is that concept that obviously there are things that can happen physically and muscularly that can keep you from any type of impairment after a stroke. But the fact that you could train and rewire the brain so that hand, arm, and shoulder function improves substantially. I mean, we're now commercial, and so we're doing implants or we're doing rehab with patients. And I was telling JoJo right before, I came up here is, it's all the stories that make all of the hard work super interesting. We just had a patient being treated in Chicago, 70-year-old, was dedicated enough to take the bus every day to go to rehab 3 times a week for 90 minutes. And afterwards, after 6 weeks, she had regained use of her hand that she hadn't had use for 4 years, and wrote a note to our clinical specialist with her hand that now works. And I think it's those vignettes that actually give you an idea of what we're really working for. Although her Fugl-Meyer improved by 14 points, that's not important. What is important is that she can now write. I'm going to hit pause there and get to questions. I know we're on a tight schedule. Thank you very much.
Okay, and Richard, before we take questions, we have, it's a little late. After lunch today, we're going to be announcing the winners of the 2022 Gold Electrode Awards. However, Microtransponder was the winner of the 2021 Gold Electrode Award for Best New Product, and you weren't here. So we'd like to, when we kept it for you, we put it in a safe because it's a valuable piece of paper here, and we made sure that it would be ready for you this year. So we want to congratulate Microtransponder for winning the 2021 Gold Electrode Award for Best New Product.
Thanks. And I think, Richard, I think we're going to jump in and just sort of be a little more impromptu, because we all know how wireless communication can be interfering with what we want to do. But I'm going to let Richard go ahead and start with a question.
Mine's a question. I'd love to hear about your the sham and how and what pushback you had, if any, from the FDA, how you achieved that.
Let's see. Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. The pushback was primarily driven by the safety of the procedure. Okay, and I think we have the benefit of, let's call it 27 years of Cyberonics and LivaNova implanting the devices, 850 physicians who know how to do it. And so they were able to get comfortable with, the largest number of, negative outcomes that you can have are really around infection and some voice hoarseness. And so that was the primary driver of them really getting comfortable with sham controlled. Some of the neuroscience, because obviously we did sham controlled and then we crossed patients over. So we actually were able to give them the therapy, and they actually showed, it's not published yet, but they showed the same benefit as the first group. So, I think it all worked out at the end, but there was definitely, with an implantable device, there's always some question. I think the second part of it is, so the first part is the safety of the procedure. The second part is you can always take the IPG out, and even though you have some small portion of the lead left, it's very safe. So that was really around it. Good question.
Thank you. Jen, I'm going to switch over to you for just a second. In a lot of your consulting and your experience in this field, what are you seeing as the biggest pain points being experienced by neural rehabilitative devices in their efforts to commercialize? Are there things that you're finding are a trend, and how can we help simplify and ease that process in the future?
Yeah, thanks for that question. One of the pain points is clinical adoption, and really getting the clinics to get on board with the therapy and really getting the societies involved as well. When you think about drop foot stimulation, it was just into the late, I think it was 2017 or 2018, drop foot stimulation finally got into the clinical practice guidelines for the APTA. So thinking about how long that needs to be in until you actually have it within clinical practice guidelines can be really difficult. So think about in terms of clinical adoption, which also plays into another pain point is training therapists, because therapists are typically overstretched, and a lot of times they like to put therapists on to 2 patients at a time, but even though they'll bill both of them. So that's something else to think about in terms of what that business model is within the rehabilitation setting. I think are probably 2 of the key things. And I think another thing from economics, Richard, you mentioned about being able to do ADLs. Those can't be your primary endpoints, because a lot of times ADLs are taken over by caregivers, and usually a caregiver is either a family member or it's not reimbursed. So it's not within that medical model. So thinking about how you can make economics an economic case, for your therapeutic device. So that's what I would say.
Okay, we have exactly 5 minutes left, and out of respect for time, I want to see if there are any other questions in the room or on Zoom. If not, I have one. Oh, we've got one.
Sorry, Jojo.
Oh, no,
I'll make it
this is your forum, so please.
A question for Richard. There are a universe of stroke patients out there already. Now, I can imagine that somebody who has a stroke tomorrow being a candidate 6 months from now for this therapy and being kind of top of mind. But how do you go about accessing this pool, this universe of patients? And yeah, I'm just.
I'll put it in 3 categories. The first is comprehensive stroke centers. Comprehensive stroke centers, by designation, have cross-pollinated the importance of treating stroke. So if you think about neurology, neurosurgery, PM&R, OT, PT, these groups all know each other's names, right? It's very different if you go to a non-stroke hospital trying to connect those 2 people, those 3 or 4 different specialties. They don't know each other. And so you look at the number of discharges that they have, and it's a simple question. What are you doing for those people that are part of your community? And so there's a model in which this becomes a way of capturing the patients that they're already treating. So that's number 1. Number 2 is you go into the community and you have to understand the dynamics of rehab, which is complicated. You have rehab hospitals, you have independent neuro rehab clinics, you even have rehab at home. And so it's really figuring out what people are willing to do to meet your guidelines as to what is needed. Because not everyone, as Jen mentioned, wants to do 90 minutes of rehab. In fact, they may have a model that's set up for volume, and I won't call it illegal, but it is to treat multiple patients with the same therapist. But people do it, right? And so I think it's an environment where you have to sort through to find people who are going to give quality, but those are the people that know the patients. And so as soon as you bring a level of confidence, they start writing down names of people and they refer those people to us. And then the third, which is not something that we can take credit for, I would say is pioneered by a number of different companies, which is taking things from either digital health or software, which is direct to consumer advertising. What is different about our therapy is, I'll use Inspire Sleep as an example. People don't know that they have sleep apnea, but people know if they had a stroke, and they certainly know if their upper limb doesn't work. And they probably have a group of people around them that know that because they're having to care for that person. And so it's not cheap. It's one of those things you have to figure out, but it is a value proposition that you can bring to the table because now you have a group of patients, unlike, other people that are raising their hand to find something that they couldn't find before.
I think with that, and we are exactly right on time.